from the Broadcast Center at BCIT's Burnaby Campus. This is All Talk Radio. You're listening to 1680 The Crow.
Good afternoon. I'm Emma Albert, and these are your top news and sports stories to 12 o'clock. 144 residents have been displaced after Monday's fire in the Vancouver Gastown neighborhood. According to BC Housing, 71 residents lost their homes at the Winters Hotel. Mayor Kennedy Stewart says the city is working closely with BC Housing and local social service agencies to find emergency shelters for those affected. In support for those who were displaced, a GoFundMe was started by the Gastown Business Improvement Association. As for the Winters Hotel, according to Stewart, it will most likely be torn down. Some major changes are taking place at one of Vancouver's most popular outdoor pools. Our reporter Hugh Perkich has the story.
Kitsilano Pool, located not far from Kitts Beach, was caught in January's rainstorm that caused significant damage to the seawall and surrounding areas. Once the water cleared, it became apparent that the pool was worse for wear. It suffered serious damage, including cracks in the floor, raised tiles, and damage to its freshwater pool chambers. In a video released on the Twitter page, Parks Board Supervisor Peter Fox says the damage wasn't made apparent until only weeks ago, when videos were released on social media. The damage is expected to be repaired, although a timeline for when the repairs will be finished is still unknown. Hugh Burkich, 1680 The Crow.
We are now joined live by reporter Hugh Perkich. So Hugh, how does the Parks and Rec Board plan accommodating for all the swimmers offset by Kitsilano Pool's closure?
Thanks, Emma. So the board announced yesterday they plan to open up Second Beach and New Brighton's pools earlier in the morning to help offset this issue.
And do they know when Kitsilano Pool could open back up?
Well, currently there isn't any information or update on when they could be done repairs and open back up, but we do know it likely won't be this summer. Back to you, Emma.
Thanks, Hugh. One person has died after a large tree fell across a busy road in Vancouver, crushing one car and damaging another. A statement from police says it happened just after 5 p.m. Tuesday on Marine Way in southeast Vancouver. Police say the victim was trapped inside and died at the scene. Investigators are appealing for dashcam video taken along the route between 5 and 6 p.m. as they try to determine why the tree fell. For the first time in more than 2 decades, the Bank of Canada has raised its key interest rate by a half point, bringing the rate to 1%. Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem says Russia's war on Ukraine, global supply chain disruptions, and inflation pushed him to make the hike.
That higher inflation, those higher prices, they're impacting all Canadians. We need to get inflation down. The economy is strong. It can handle higher interest rates. It needs higher interest rates to bring demand in balance with supply.
Macklem also warned that finding that balance could mean further rate hikes. A storm is brewing in southern Manitoba and southeastern Saskatchewan. Schools and highways are closed in many areas due to heavy snow and strong winds. Environment Canada meteorologist Natalie Hazel says up to 80 centimeters of snow is expected in some regions of western Manitoba, although that now appears less likely than earlier.
Right now, the 80 centimeters is still within the realm of possibility that it's more likely that we'll see closer to 60 centimeters there, and closer to 40 centimeters in Winnipeg.
The weather agency is urging people not to travel, saying even moving within communities may become impossible by this evening, continuing into tomorrow. As well, shoppers in Manitoba were out in force yesterday, stocking up for the expected spring snowstorm. The Alberta government says it will match federal funding for municipal transportation across the province due to revenue being lost during the COVID-19 pandemic. Premier Jason Kenney told a news conference in Calgary that Alberta will contribute about $80 million to bring the combined provincial federal support to $159 million. Kenney said municipalities in the Calgary region are to receive $82.4 million. Calgary Mayor Jyoti Gondek said the funding will help make up for the revenue City Transit has lost. She said it will also help the city move closer to bringing back critical bus routes. The province is to announce how much funding Edmonton is to receive later today. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says Canada and its allies are willing to maintain economic sanctions against Russia for years, if necessary. Trudeau says the measures are having a massive effect on the Putin regime, and the countries imposing them remain united.
Not only did we bring them in swiftly in an incredibly united way, but we are ready to hold them as long as we need for the coming months, the coming years, if necessary, to make sure that Vladimir Putin loses in this attack on Ukraine.
Trudeau's remarks come as U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen warns that countries who undermine the sanctions will face consequences. No countries have done so yet, but there are fears among the allies that China could. Experts commissioned by the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe say they have found clear patterns of violations of international humanitarian law by Russian forces in Ukraine. Charles de Ledesma for the Associated Press has more.
Their report finds that the mission found clear evidence of IHL violations by the Russian forces in their conduct of hostilities, adding that if they had respected their obligations in terms of distinction, proportionality and precautions in attack, the number of civilians killed or injured would have remained much lower. If that had been the case, they added, far fewer residential buildings, schools and other facilities would have been damaged or destroyed. The report explains Russia had told the mission it considered the mechanism under which the experts were appointed largely outdated and redundant, and declined to appoint a liaison person. I'm Charles de Ledesma.
Authorities have arrested a man wanted in an attack on a subway train in Brooklyn that left 10 people wounded by gunfire. Investigators had announced Tuesday afternoon that they were searching for Frank R. James, who is believed to have rented a van possibly connected to the violence. By Wednesday morning, New York authorities said he was a suspect in the shooting itself. He was taken into custody Wednesday afternoon in Manhattan. Authorities were examining social media videos in which the 62-year-old claimed the United States to be a racist place awash in violence. Nearly 24 people were injured when tornadoes swept through central Texas as part of a storm system that's expected to spawn more twisters and damaging winds. The storms caused widespread damage Tuesday in Salado, about 50 miles north of Austin. Bell County Judge David Blackburn, the county's top elected official, said 23 people were injured, one of them critically. Forecasters say hurricane-force winds, intense tornadoes, and large hail are possible in Arkansas, Illinois, Tennessee, Missouri, Kentucky, Mississippi, Indiana, Louisiana, and Alabama. While Little Rock, Arkansas, and Memphis, Tennessee are among the cities that could see the worst weather Wednesday. Elsewhere, the North Dakota Capitol schools, government offices, and interstates were closed Wednesday due to a blizzard. Taking a look at NHL standings, the Vancouver Canucks hung on and took a 5-4 overtime win over the Vegas Golden Knights last night. While the Canucks won their fourth straight game, they failed to gain 2 points on Vegas, meaning some more work needs to be done if the Canucks want to snag a playoff spot. The Dallas Stars also won over Tampa Bay, putting them 6 points ahead of Vancouver for the final wildcard spot, with Vegas still sitting in the middle 3 points ahead of Vancouver. Tonight, Eastern Division teams, the Montreal Canadiens and the Columbus Jackets, are hitting the ice. In their second road game against the Yankees, the Blue Jays have fallen short, losing 4-0 Tuesday night in New York. With a win for each team so far, both will be looking to get the series advantage in tonight's game. Tonight's game begins at 4 p.m. Pacific time. Alyssa Nakken has made Major League Baseball history as the first female coach on the field in a regular season game. ABC's Sherry Preston has more.
It's the first time that a woman has ever.
After regular first base coach Anton Richardson was ejected in the third inning, San Francisco Giants' Kai Correa made the call. Alyssa Nakken was being sent in.
Now I know exactly how our pinch hitters feel when Kai Correa comes down to the cage and tells them to get ready to go in and at bat.
But they aren't making history. Nakken did by becoming the first woman to coach on the field in win a regular season game. Her helmet's already on the way to Cooperstown, and she's already thinking about the next game.
For the weather update today, we are currently sitting at 8 degrees with a low of -1 for the day. It's mostly cloudy right now, but we're seeing a 30% chance of rain or wet flurries overnight. Those were your news and sports for 12 o'clock. I'm Emma Albert, and you're listening to 1680 The Crow.
Stay tuned for more on BCIT's 1680 The Crow.
Everything is changing to digital. Everything is online. People aren't just waiting for the 6 o'clock news anymore. People want their news right now. They want to be able to go onto their smartphone, onto the internet, and see the news that they want to see.
Vancouver is growing at, a really rapid rate, the Lower Mainland even, and with the tools that we're given here, we're able to cover all of that.
Welcome to BCIT Magazine. I'm Radhika Sikki-King.
In the program, they really leave it up to you. I mean, the help is there when you need it, figuring out how to use the programs like Premiere, Audition, and figuring out how to use the cameras. But it's up to you to sort of experiment and figure out what you can do when you go out in the field.
They brought candles and flowers to remember the student who lost her life yesterday.
Theresa May says the international community condemns Moscow.
They really make sure that you know the basics and you are able to put out a quality product.
I'm Brady Tretanero.
And I'm Radhika Sikki-King. Thank you for tuning in to BCIT Magazine.
Hey there! Welcome to Companion Call. I'm Tiger Ann.
And I'm Sadie Chung. You're listening to 1680 The Crow. Ramadan is a holy month of fasting, introspection, and prayer for Muslims. It's celebrated as the month during which Muhammad received the initial revelations of the Quran, the holy book for Muslims. Now, today we hope to learn about and highlight 3 areas of discussion: the rules and traditions of Ramadan, how schools and workplaces can accommodate Muslims during the month, and what it's like taking part in Canada versus the Middle East. Ari Azez is the former president of the BCIT Muslim Students Association. He graduated just last year. He's also a regular volunteer with Ask a Muslim Canada, which is a local organization focused on hosting open discussions and distributing free books about Islam. We also have Burnaby Mountain Secondary student Menna Khadir joining us today. Menna is a Muslim student from Syria who immigrated to Canada in 2019. So we'll start with segment 1, the rules and traditions of Ramadan.
Let's start with you, Ari. And first of all, can you also tell us if were you born here or did you grow up, have a different background?
Yeah, actually, I'm from East Vancouver, but I've moved to Surrey with my family about 16 years ago. So aside from a year that I lived in Calgary, which I will never repeat, I'm pretty much a Lower Mainland boy. But we do visit the Middle East. We're from Kurdistan, which is a region in North Iraq. So we visit every few years in the summer and just reconnect with our roots and kind of visit family and everything, right?
Yeah, lovely.
So how do you celebrate the traditions of Ramadan?
Right, that's a great question. I mean, it's important to note that unlike a lot of holidays that we have here in North America, the month of Ramadan isn't necessarily a celebration. It's actually more of an act of worship, right? And the celebration is a day that we call Eid, which comes at the very end of Ramadan. And it's basically a way to kind of congratulate yourself and everyone around you for completing a month of devotion and obedience to your Creator and spiritual refinement. To answer your question more specifically, the month of Ramadan, it's the ninth month of the Islamic lunar calendar, and in it, Muslims are essentially commanded to, number 1, refrain from food and drink as long as the sun is out, right? So when it's night, we can eat and drink. It's not like we're all month just like starving, right? So we do replenish ourselves at night. And it's not just food and drink like people think. You also have to refrain from intercourse if you are married with your spouse during the daylight hours. And there's also general things that we should refrain from year long, but it's emphasized during Ramadan, which is also, being mindful of your language, the things that you look at, the things that you are doing during the day, the places that you're going to, and just generally how you're spending your time. You are much better off trying to be productive and working on, self-improvement than to just kind of watch Netflix all day and, not leave your bed.
Totally. Yeah, that's beautiful. Did you have anything to add to that, Menna?
My opinion was actually similar to his, because Ramadan is not a celebration necessarily. It's more like a month of worship and forgiveness, where you can build your faith in God more, pray, read Quran, which is their holy book. You also fast, not just from drinks and food. You also fast from lying, from saying bad words, and etc., etc. So it's not a celebration necessarily. We do celebrate it, but it's not like a celebration. It's more like a month of worship.
Yeah, totally. That's really interesting. And sticking along the lines of fasting, depending on your circumstances, does everyone need to fast, or are there different exceptions?
There are exceptions that are outlined in the Quran, especially in the 2nd chapter called Surah Al-Baqarah. And in particular, children that have not reached the age of puberty, they're exempt. Also, for example, women that are breastfeeding, women that are pregnant, women also that are on their periods, and anyone that is sick or elderly as well. You can see that there's different categories, and the general concept within our religion is, as the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, is that you should not harm others and you shouldn't let harm be done. So we see these exemptions as God's mercy towards all of us as humans, and he knows that some of us are weak and we can't necessarily finish it, whether because of our age or our health conditions at the time. And so these people are exempt. And if you are from these conditions that are exempt, except for the children, then you're told to just make up the day at a later date in the year if you're able to. And if not, then you should try to at least feed a poor person as expiation.
Wow, that's super interesting.
Nana, what do you think?
Yeah, what he said is correct, but I just want to mention something else. So my friends in school always think that Ramadan actually comes on a specific month, but no, Ramadan doesn't come on a fixed date in the year. It actually comes in a different month every year because I guess it depends on the moon. When the moon becomes like a crescent, I guess, they know that Ramadan should like begin. Yeah, that's what I wanted to mention because my friends get confused a lot. Like, when does it start? Does it like come on a different month every year? And I was like, yeah, I just explained that for them.
Yeah.
That is really cool because in Chinese New Year it's the same way. We go by the lunar calendar, and it's a different date every year. Quite interesting.
Yes, that's a good point you raise. Yeah, and the Islamic calendar is also based upon the lunar calendar, and so to be specific, the lunar calendar has only 354 days in the year instead of 365, which the lunar does. So every year we actually shift back 11 days. So a few years ago we were fasting in the summer, and it was kind of hot and about 18 hours every day. But now every year we're shifting closer and closer towards the winter, and it's getting a bit easier.
There you go.
So how do you guys break your fast? You talk about, Ramadan is like the period for Allah. And tell me more about Eid. That is like more like a celebration, right? When everyone comes together and break their fast. What is that like? And can you compare? I don't know if you have ever celebrated, went through Ramadan in the Middle East. Are there any differences between here and abroad? I guess Mena can definitely answer this question. So why don't we start with Mena?
So yeah, it is very different from the Middle East because that Eid is it is a 3-day celebration that comes right after Ramadan, where we break our fasting, and the celebration actually begins by going to the Eid prayers in the morning, and then after the prayers we go to our grandparents' house, greet everyone, and then elders start giving money and treats to kids. That was my favorite part, to be honest. It's still my favorite. And then it would just be hang out, travel, go to the amusement park. It is a fun celebration. It's just like Christmas for Christians. Eid is like Christmas for Muslims. It is that fun for us.
Wow, definitely something to look forward to.
Yeah. And my mom used to do a specific, tradition that no one else does. So every time in Eid, she used to put a gift under my and my sister pillows. So we would wake up the next day and actually find a gift under our pillows. So
that's cute. Oh, yeah. That is exciting. And does she still do that?
We got old right now, so
darn it. And what about you, Ari? Do you have any kind of traditions you do yourself?
Yeah, it's really interesting hearing Mina's experiences back home. I think in the Middle East, it's definitely a lot more fun when you have everyone, literally every single person celebrating with you. Whereas here, you kind of got to take the day off of school or work to go celebrate. But once you get into that crowd, it's definitely a big thing. In general, there are certain so to say rituals that everyone follows that we have in common that's based in the religion. So for example, on the day of Eid, you'd wake up and you would take a shower or a bath, and you'd wear some really clean clothes and put on some nice perfume. And we would start off with a community prayer outdoors typically. And so I live in Surrey, so we used to go to Bear Creek Park every year. And it's a really different environment because it's one thing to pray in your place of worship, but to do it outdoors and the grass and the trees and everyone's around you, it's really cool.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, and so after that, that's typically when literally the eating and the drinking begins, because this holiday in specific at the end of Ramadan, it is known as the holiday of the feast. because you just went like 30 days of like restraining and kind of practicing your self-control. And so now is a chance for everyone to go out and to celebrate. And we have a specific charity that everyone is obligated to pay, regardless if you're young or old, or even for children. And typically, like the father would pay on behalf of their whole family. And this charity goes to all the poor families to ensure that everyone has enough funds to eat and drink during these days, so nobody's left out.
Oh, that's great. And so, forgive me if I pronounce this wrong. I'm hearing about sahur and that there's different recipes. Can you tell me about that and what exactly that is?
Maybe I'll pass it over to Mina. She probably has more recipes than me.
Yeah, Mina, let us know.
Okay, sure. So for sahur, we prefer to eat something light so we don't get thirsty or hungry the next day. So I heard that bananas and yogurt actually like reduce thirst and hunger. So what I like to do is like an oatmeal recipe, which I was just oatmeal and bananas, honey, yogurt. That's my favorite for sahur. It's very light, and I don't get thirsty or hungry the next day. So
good thinking, strategic
cool.
planning.
I think that's all we have for the first segment.
Yeah.
And now let's move down to the second segment. Ari and Mena. Ari, you're the BCIT Muslim Association ex-president, so you're very involved on campus. And Mena is a high school student.
Mm-hmm.
So how can schools and workplaces, like, how can they accommodate Muslim people during Ramadan? I know the BCIT offers a prayer room. Maybe, Ari, can you talk about that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great question. And it's quite interesting because the way that workplaces and schools could accommodate for Muslims during Ramadan is the same way that they could accommodate throughout the rest of the year, which is, we're fairly low maintenance. And all we really need is that, the same way that a lot of classes offer a 10-minute break for you to go out and grab a coffee or have a smoke, a lot of Muslims usually take that 10-minute break to go out and pray, to just take that moment to reconnect with their creator and take a bit of a break from the world, because there's always a lot going on and it's easy to get distracted. So it's great that, as you mentioned, BCIT has a prayer room just above the student association, and for a lot of other schools or workplaces that don't already have a prayer room, you don't actually need anything special, just a clean place. As the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, the entire earth is a place to worship. So you can be outdoors in the park, you can be, in a closet somewhere in your bedroom. You don't really have like a designated special thing that you need. In fact, when I used to study at Kwantlen University, they had an empty classroom that they just laid down some carpet and they said, here, this is your new prayer room. And we've been using that for years now. So yeah, just being mindful of, the fact that as Muslims, we do have prayer times throughout the day. They're evenly spaced out. And typically throughout the day, it's only once in the summer that we would have to take a break. And in the winter, because the days are much shorter, usually about twice. So just be mindful of the prayer times. Understand if your student comes 10 minutes late to class or to work, especially on Fridays, because on Fridays we have a community prayer that is obligatory upon every Muslim male. And number one, being mindful of the time, and number two, if you don't already have a space, try and accommodate and come up with a prayer place.
Yeah, totally. And Mena, on that note, like, as we said, you're in high school. So do you feel like accommodated there? You might participate in PE or any kind of physical things. And I can imagine that taking a toll on you, especially when you're fasting. So are there ways that they can accommodate that? Are there expectations, or should there be?
Yeah, as you said, PE class is a real issue. I don't know if you guys know, but PE class from grade 8 to 10 is mandatory in high school. So last year, I had PE class every day while I was fasting, and we used to do all that hard work, when I was fasting. So I used to go back home almost dead. So I think schools should make like PE classes optional for Muslims during Ramadan. I also think that, so let me tell you, last year also, I went on a hike with my teacher, like with my class, okay? And then the teacher started offering us Timbits. I don't know if you guys know Timbits.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And I actually thanked him. Like I said, I don't eat right now because I'm fasting.
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't know if he was like, he understood me. But then like a few minutes later, he came back again and offered me Timbits again. I don't know if he did that on purpose. I'm not sure, but that wasn't nice of him.
Yeah.
To be honest, he offered me Timbits like 3 times, and I told him that I'm fasting. So I don't know if that was on purpose. I'm assuming it's not, to be honest. But like, just avoid offering food for Muslim students. That's also another thing.
It's like they're tempting you almost, right?
Yeah, so I'm going to play something now, and just for our viewers, just because I know for me, I've never heard of this, and I'm sure a lot of other people haven't. I'm going to play the azan, which is the Muslim call to prayer, as I'm sure
okay
you
with you
know.
guys?
Is that okay with you?
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, that is super beautiful. And when you're at school, when you're from work, like how do you get a reminder that it's time to prayer?
I actually have an app for that.
Ooh.
I set this app where like I'm staying, but like let's say I'm staying now in Burnaby. I set this app that I'm staying in Burnaby, and then every time like how do I say it? But it just like the azan comes up.
Yeah, and it alerts you. That's super cool that they make apps like that. And do you use kind of the same, Ari, or is there a different way that you go by?
I think pretty much everyone uses the app now. In the Muslim countries, they actually do the call to prayer live because there's so many mosques all around the city, and they also have permits with the government to use the mega speakers and make sure that the noise gets heard. Being here, you can't really have that same permit. So yeah, we have our push notifications on our app, and if you have your location services turned on, even if you're traveling, it basically calculates like when the sun is going to rise or when it's going to set, and it'll just boop, it'll give you a little notification. You can choose to actually set so that your notification gives you like a pre-recorded adhan.
Okay.
Or you can just have it like a silent one. I'm at work. I don't want to like freak out my coworkers, so I just have the silent one on. My mom keeps it on loud, so she'll be in Walmart and it'll just go off. So
I love it.
Everyone has their own preferences.
I love it. Well, I think we should move on to our last segment, and that is just about what it's like taking part in Ramadan in Canada versus the Middle East. So, Mena, maybe you can talk about what the difference was for you having Ramadan in Syria and what's it like now in Canada.
Yeah, it is really different. So back there, we used to all gather to eat what we call iftar together, like as a family, and then like watch series together, pray together. It used to be much more fun, to be honest. Also, like back in Egypt, I used to, when I want to break my fasting and eat iftar, I used to like hear azan from the mosque itself, not just from the app, not just like an app notification. So it is really different. It's much more fun in the Middle East, and also, but back there, before Ramadan comes, neighbors, like all neighbors, decorate the neighborhood, their houses. So it feels fun, like just going into a neighborhood that is full of decorations, and it feels fun. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure you can all relate. And then I think just a final question for both of you.
Both of you, this might be a little bit deeper. So do you think Canada needs to adapt a little bit more to Muslim traditions, especially on Canadian soil? What do you guys think?
Being here in Canada is definitely a big blessing. Religious freedom is something that we all get to benefit from and enjoy. We're all free to, dress the way that we want, to worship the way that we want. And it's not necessarily something that you have to do in private. Like, we have the ability to come here, even like on this podcast, and we can talk freely about our beliefs and share our thoughts with one another. So overall, like, I think Canada is definitely doing a great job.
Good. Well, that's all the time we have.
Sorry. Yeah,
Thank you
that's
so much for,
joining
sharing.
us and educating the public. I feel like we learned a lot, but once this podcast is published, people are going to learn a lot more.
Yeah, and it's so interesting. So once again, thank you both.
Awesome. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
I'm Sadie Chung.
And I'm Tiger Ann.
You're listening to 1680 The Crow.
Ramadan Mubarak.
Hello, and welcome back everyone to the latest episode of the Three Stand podcast. I'm your host, Yusuf Habib, and joining me today are two members of our production team, Tara Chloe Desange.
Greetings, everyone.
And Gurpreet Kambo.
Hi.
So our story today is the assassination of William C. Hopkinson by Mewa Singh. The assassination took place in Vancouver in 1914. William Hopkinson was a British officer tasked with policing the South Asian laborers in BC at the time. And Mewa Singh, the assassin, was a Punjabi Sikh activist and member of the Ghadar Party, which was a movement that called for the overthrow of colonial British rule in India. We'll also hear from Paneet Singh, who is a playwright and filmmaker here in BC, as well as Dr. Satwinder Bains, who is an associate professor in social cultural media studies at the University of the Fraser Valley. So, Gurpreet, there was a lot going on in BC at the time. Give us some context here.
So the Punjabi community has a long history here in BC, over 150 years. They, alongside the Chinese community and other ethnic communities, played a really pivotal part in the building of this province. Economically, they played a huge part economically, even if they were discriminated against. There was a lot of systemic discrimination in the laws. There was also a lot of overt discrimination from white Canadians, right? It was acceptable at that time for white Canadians to discriminate against people of color. I spoke to Satwinder Bains, a professor at University of Fraser Valley and a historian of the Punjabi community in BC. Here she is.
So the first immigrants that came here, and Mewa Singh is one of the first that arrived, were settling in a very difficult historical moment where racism was rampant on a day-to-day basis against individuals, but also by government, by media. So they were also feeling the stress of living in a white country, white-only country, and there was a hierarchical positioning of labor. So they were at the bottom of the heap with the Chinese and the Japanese laborers, and they were not getting paid, for example, the same wages. So the society that they came into was a very challenging society.
Tara Chloe, what do you think, or what was happening in the Vancouver Punjabi community at the time?
There was a lot happening. It was a very complicated time politically. It was definitely had a huge effect on the community. For example, the British were still occupying India at the time, and so many members of the community were still British subjects, and a lot of them were activists. They were a part of the Ghadar movement, the Indian rebel movement against the British occupation. There's already a lot of political agitation at this time.
Enter the infamous Komagata, a Japanese steamship with predominantly Punjabi passengers. They were attempting to immigrate to Canada, but most were denied entry and forced to return to India.
When the Komagata arrived in Canada, at the time there was strict immigration laws. As you know, the continuous journey passage, people were being prevented from coming to this country, brown bodies anyway, and especially the laws prevented women and children from arriving. So they didn't want South Asian or Punjabi Sikh immigrants to actually settle here. They wanted them to be temporary laborers. As laborers, they're very welcome, but they didn't welcome them as permanent citizens.
Now that we kind of understand the context a little bit better, Tara Chloe, could you talk us through about who this Mewa Singh person is and what were his motives?
Mewa Singh was described as being simple, a very simple man. A Gurdwara going man, a man who was of God.
So, Gurpreet, who was William C. Hopkinson?
He was, a white British man. He was an officer in the British Army. He spoke Hindi, and English, of course, having grown up in India. And he later moved to Vancouver. So that made him a perfect person to liaise with the South Asian community in Vancouver. He wasn't that old either. I mean, when he was shot, he was only 34 years old. It's an interesting role to find yourself in, right? Being a white man who is familiar with the sort of South Asian dynamics and the language, and having to keep tabs on the community for the British government. Really interesting role to find oneself in, that's for sure. So here's a clip from Satwinder on the events leading up to the assassination and the informants.
And I think the last straw for them was when they realized that this man, William Hopkinson, who was an immigration official, had been hired by the government because he was from India, he spoke the language, to be the leader who could get informers to join their processes to get the secrets of the community out. So they saw him as very much a proponent of excluding South Asians from settling in BC. And when the Komagata was turned back, I think that's when in Meva Singh, this idea that there has to come closure to this situation. And while this had been happening, the informers had shot upon their own kind in the Gurdwara and killed a few people. So by the time that case went into the courts, I think that's when Meva Singh decided, on his own volition, from what we know, to take some action. And he saw himself as a martyr.
Here's a clip from Puneet about that.
They saw themselves as long as Hopkinson's around, that we're stuck, that no matter what we do, that there's always going to be a response from the government through this person. And Meva Singh's individual situation, I think, was a reflection of that. And that's what he communicates to in his statement, is that there's no avenue for us in this place. So I think that sentiment is evoked by him, and I think it's shared by the community too, that this was a last resort of that. If this doesn't happen, really there's no pathway forward for us.
So yeah, after that incident at the Gurdwara, that's where Meva Singh took action.
That's correct. He decided that Hopkins was responsible for all of the discord in the community.
Hopkinson had informants in the community who were keeping tabs on the rebel Ghadar movement. The Komagata incident caused a big backlash within the Punjabi community against the local government and local officials. Hopkinson's informants were afraid of being exposed. 2 of them had died recently under mysterious circumstances, and he thought he might be in for the same fate. Encouraged by Hopkinson, one of the spies, Bela Singh, shot and killed a number of people at a Gurdwara, including some members of the Ghadar party who he feared might expose him. At Bela Singh's trial, Hopkinson was meant to testify in Bela Singh's defense. And while Hopkinson was waiting outside one of the courtrooms, Meva Singh approached him, pulled out a revolver, and opened fire, shooting him 5 times. Meva Singh did not resist arrest. He immediately dropped his gun and turned himself in. His trial was held the very same day.
Puneet Singh, as you know, wrote a play about the assassination, but also he speaks to us about the mindset that led up to the assassination of William C. Hopkins and what was going through Meva's mind.
When it comes down to the time that Meva Singh's at these steps, he's alone. He's by himself. He's walking up the front stairs of what is now the facade of the Vancouver Art Gallery, but for the Vancouver Provincial Courthouse would have been the main entrance. When he gets into the rotunda, which is still there, and he's going off down into a hallway where Hopkinson's standing, he's very much alone, and that becomes an idea that he rallies around for the rest of, from the time that he assassinates Hopkinson up until the time of his death, that he is going into this alone as an individual.
And here's Satwinder giving her perspective on that pivotal moment where Mehwa Singh shot Hopkinson.
He never protested once he shot Hopkinson in the court that he should not be arrested, he said, I have killed this man because of the injustice that had been meted out against us. And they asked him many times whether he had been in collusion with other people, and he just said, no, I did this on my own. So I think he saw himself as a martyr, and he was willing to sacrifice himself to the cause. And so the South Asian community is beholden to him for taking that position at the time when things were so difficult. And as we know, he was executed, he was hanged, and the body was given to the Sikhs to have a burial. And up to today, people remember him as someone who took a stand against the injustices that were meted out against the South Asian community, especially Sikhs at the time.
So yeah, that's just incredible thinking about what was going through Mehwa Singh's mind at the time.
Yeah, and I think it's just kind of what we spoke to about earlier is that mindset of there is no other choice. I have to do this. I feel that being a man of God, he might have even felt that it was his God-given duty to do this. And that's why he surrendered so naturally, because he was aware that he was going to be punished for his actions. And we see that martyrism throughout history with a lot of situations, but it shows you how passionate people can feel about their community, their religion, their beliefs, and how core that is to their system and their actions.
Sikh and South Asian community at that time tries to get in touch with Mehwa Singh. Mehwa Singh writes them a letter back, and that letter back, we still have a copy of the translation today. He says, "Don't cry for my death, that I've lost myself for this good cause. And I know that in this next lifetime, I'm going to be honored by my Guru. I'm going to be, that I've done a good deed, that this is a victory for my great Guru, that I've done this thing." So he's really devoted himself to this cause. And I think at that point, when he's pulled that trigger, when he's walking up those steps, I think he knows there's no kind of, once he's pulled the trigger, there's no going back.
I did want to ask about the justification of the actual murder. It's a violent act. Was it justified?
I think that's a really great question. I think if you're looking at it just in layman's terms, that was a murder. That's wrong. But in this situation, there's so much background, so many layers that go into the story.
You can't really take values from 2021, from this time and place, and apply them to what was a very different time and context, right? And here's what Satwinder had to say about it.
It's easy to talk about violence in isolation. The violence meted out by colonial powers, if you just equate that to what was happening, and then you have to put it in context. You can't take Mehwa Singh's actions without the context. So if somebody used to question you about that violent action, you must then study colonial history to understand what the violent action on the other side was. 3 million lost in a Bengal famine versus one man. Let's put some context around this. The raping, pillaging, and financial hoarding of money from India and the colonies. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, definitely some huge takeaways from this story, right? Like, Tara, what did this story mean to you?
Just learning of the story and the struggles that the South Asian community has faced, I'm kind of marveled because even now I have experienced racism in my life, but I've always had clothes on my back. I've always had food on my table. I've always had education. I've always had family. I've always been very blessed, and I've always been able to feel liberated.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. Would we be here today? I think people like Mehwa Singh made a lot of sacrifices for the community, and in accordance with the Sikh philosophy, right? And so, there's this...
Everything is changing to digital. Everything is online. People aren't just waiting for the 6 o'clock news anymore. People want their news right now. They want to be able to go onto their smartphone, onto the internet, and see the news that they want to see.
Vancouver is growing at, a really rapid rate, the Lower Mainland even, and with the tools that we're given here, we're able to cover all of that.
Welcome to BCIT Magazine. I'm Radhika Sikki-King.
In the program, they really leave it up to you. I mean, the help is there when you need it, figuring out how to use the programs like Premiere, Audition, and figuring out how to use the cameras. But it's up to you to sort of experiment and figure out what you can do when you go out in the field.
They brought candles and flowers to remember the student who lost her life yesterday.
Theresa May says the international community condemns Moscow.
They really make sure that you know the basics and you are able to put out a quality product.
I'm Brady Tretanero.
And I'm Radhika Sikki-King. Thank you for tuning in to BCIT Magazine.
From the Broadcast Center at BCIT's Burnaby Campus, this is All Talk Radio. You're listening to 1680 The Crow.
Good afternoon, I'm McKenna O'Neill with your 1 o'clock news.
The Bank of Canada is raising its key interest rate by the highest amount in more than 20 years. The central bank is increasing its policy rate by 0.5 percentage point to 1% and warning that rates will need to rise further. Inflation, the pandemic, and the commodity prices after Russia's invasion of Ukraine are driving inflation higher than its earlier expectations. It now says the annual inflation rate will average almost 6% in the first half of the year. Health Canada says almost 1.5 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines held in a national inventory have expired since January. Mia Rabson with the Canadian Press has more.
The expired vaccines include more than 400,000 Moderna doses that hit the end of their shelf life on Tuesday. Health Canada says the expired doses make up less than 2% of Canada's total vaccine supply to date, but there are more than 18 million doses in a national inventory, and most of them will expire by the end of August. Health Canada says it's doing its best to use or donate doses before they expire and won't throw any doses out unless the manufacturer says the expiration date can't be extended. Mia Rabson, The Canadian Press, Ottawa.
2 fundraisers have been launched to help those impacted by Monday's fire in a Gastown heritage building. A GoFundMe was started by the Gastown Business Improvement Association to help support local businesses that have been affected. The fire broke out on Abbott Street, forcing some businesses to shut down until the site is deemed safe. Mayor Kennedy Stewart stated the building will likely be demolished. The Transportation Ministry says the Lionsgate Bridge in Vancouver will be closed for 3 consecutive nights starting Friday. It says the closures are necessary to complete the counterflow system upgrade, which includes the electrical system changeover and system testing. During the day, the bridge will be partially open to traffic. The Canadian Human Rights Commission says Canada needs an independent public inquiry to address serious issues of sexual violence and coercion in federal prisons for women. The Commission is adding its weight to the call for such an inquiry made a year ago by the Canadian Association of Elizabeth Fry Societies. The statement comes 10 days after a former prison guard at the Nova Institution for Women pled guilty to 6 charges in relation to the sexual assault of 3 women inmates. The Correctional Service of Canada says it is developing a policy this spring on sexual coercion and violence in its institutions. School, flights, and even an NHL game have been cancelled as parts of the prairies brace for a heavy spring snow. Environment Canada is forecasting what they say could be the worst blizzard in decades. The weather agency says up to 50 centimeters of snow is expected to fall in southeastern Saskatchewan and most of southern Manitoba by Friday. RCMP plan to close all major highways in southern Manitoba and warn that first responders may not be able to help travelers who become stranded or need help. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says he agrees with U.S. President Joe Biden that Russia's actions in Ukraine could be considered genocide. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky praised Biden's comments. Trudeau says Putin and his affiliates must be held accountable for his war crimes.
The use of targeted attacks against civilians, against hospitals, against maternity wards, against train stations filled with people fleeing, the deliberate use of sexual violence, the way that they're attacking Ukrainian identity and culture. These are all things that are war crimes that Putin is responsible for. These are all things that are crimes against humanity.
Authorities have arrested a man wanted in yesterday's attack on a subway train in Brooklyn that left 10 people wounded by gunfire. Investigators had announced Tuesday afternoon they were searching for Frank R. James, who believed to have rented a van possibly connected to the crime. This morning, New York authorities announced he was a suspect in the shooting. He was taken into custody this afternoon in Manhattan. And on to sports, the Vancouver Canucks took a 5-4 overtime win over the Las Vegas Golden Knights last night. This was the Canucks' 4th straight win. The Dallas Stars won over Tampa Bay, putting them 6 points ahead of Vancouver for the final wild-card spot. Vegas is still 3 points ahead of Vancouver, even after last night's win. Tonight, the Montreal Canadiens will be facing off against the Columbus Blue Jackets for the 3rd and final time this season. Both teams are looking to end on a high note. In last night's game, the Toronto Blue Jays fell short to the New York Yankees, losing 4-0. With a win from each team thus far, both will be looking to get the series advantage in tonight's game. Tonight's game begins at 4 p.m. Today in weather, we can expect partly cloudy conditions from 10 to 2 with scattered thunderstorms at 3. We can see a mix of sun and cloud through the rest of the week. This has been your 1 o'clock news. I'm McKenna O'Neill, and you're listening to 1680 The Crow.
Stay tuned for more on BCIT's 1680 The Crow.